CBS Sports.
High drive, center field, hit the wall, grand slam. This is magnificent.
Got a fantasy question? Email fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. Get ready to win your league.
Where fantasy becomes reality.
Now here's Frank, Scott, Chris, and Adam.
Position previews roll on, this time first base. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Tuesday, February 8th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers, who is just wearing a beautiful Hawaiian-esque button-down shirt. Big fan of the shirt here, Chris. What's happening, buddy?
Yeah, it's been really cold in New York, and this is my third winter in New York, and I feel like this has been by far the coldest winter. I feel like it hasn't been above, 35 degrees in 3 weeks or something like that. And most days have been in the feels like 9 degrees range. So I'm just trying to wear a tropical themed shirt to try to manifest some warm weather,
It has been kind of, especially cold this winter. We've gotten in the 40s a couple different weeks already.
Well, look, man, I've always said 48 in Miami, it hits different. I don't know what it is. Maybe you're not used to it. Maybe it's the humid air, but 48 in Miami is legitimately, it feels cold in a way that
I'm
48 here does not.
I cannot handle cold anymore. And it only took a couple years of living in South Florida for that to be the case.
You are a skinny little thing, Yeah. You don't got a lot of meat on those bones.
I can't get enough layers whenever I go north during, Gosh, I mean, we took a trip to San Francisco, and this was 10 years ago. And I know what's Mark Twain's famous quote about San Francisco. Nobody knows it. I figured you know it, Chris. The coldest winter I ever spent was summer in San Francisco, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
I was freezing the whole time.
You know what the trick is, Scott? The underlayer is the most important layer. The layer, if you get the long johns.
That's the waffle shirt.
Yeah. No. I'm talking like a thermal underwear kind of thing. That's the skin tight.
Yeah, you gotta get an Under Armour type thing. Underneath there, and then thermal.
But see, I never had that. I lived in Georgia. Georgia it gets freezing in the winter for weeks at a time, and I never had to do that. But whatever.
Let's hope you never have to do it either. Anyway, 3 minutes.
Someone who lives in Minnesota is just shouting at us right now through the podcast app.
Yeah, our Canadian listening audience is laughing at us right now. Anyway, 3 minutes of our first base position preview that earned us at least 5 comments on YouTube after this is all said and done. The first base preview today, we are going to do some outlook and strategy, of course, some ADP review, sleepers, breakouts, busts, and more. But Chris, we'll start with you because of that beautiful shirt that you're wearing. What does this position look like in 2022? First base. I feel like it's not filled with as many star-studded hitters up top as there used to be, but feels very, very deep. What do you think about first base?
It's always going to be there's never going to be a shortage of competent players at first base because it's such an easy position to play defensively. Sorry, Ron Washington and Scott Hatterberg. That's a little Moneyball reference for you guys.
Gotcha.
But it's a relatively easy position. It's certainly the easiest position to play on the infield. And so you'll get a lot of guys shuffled there at the end of their careers, or if they can't hack it elsewhere, but their bat's good, or you just need a late inning replacement. You need to get a guy's bat in the line. That's kind of the spare sock drawer or something. That's just kind of where you throw guys out there if you need to get them some playing time. And so there's always going to be good players at first base. But I think one thing that we're seeing as a long-term trend at the position around baseball is because teams are getting better at shifting and because teams are getting better at defensive positioning and because generally the defensive spectrum seems to have gotten flattened a little bit, is you'll see teams move Max Muncy all over the field. Guys who in the past might have just played first base. All of a sudden, those guys are getting moved around the diamond in a way that makes it so that players who normally would be first basemen in the past are all of a sudden playing elsewhere, and it's made other positions stronger. It's kind of made positional scarcity less of a thing, and it's made first base, I don't know if it's weaker, but definitely not as top heavy as it used to be.
Yeah, we'll mention a few names later on, but DJ LeMahieu, Jake Cronenworth are a few of those names that they have first base eligibility. Don't really think about them as traditional first basemen, but nonetheless, you can use them there in fantasy baseball this upcoming season. Scott, what do you think about the first base position, and what is your strategy at this position? Where do you find yourself going? Is there a specific tier? Are there names in particular that you wait on at the position? What do you think about first base this year?
I feel like first base is the position, maybe more than any other, where I don't really have a specific strategy. I just keep a close eye on how quickly the tiers are depleting, and when the right opportunity comes to take from that tier, I do. That could be Pete Alonso in round 5. I mean, look, it could be Vladimir Guerrero in round 1, right? It could be Pete Alonso in round 5. It could be like a CJ Cron or Rhys Hoskins in round 9 or 10. I'm loving the value of Joey Votto, at least in terms of ADP so far. Now, a lot of the drafts I've done, he hasn't lasted to his ADP, but I think, if you're talking like a points league, I'm not so sure he deserves to be a tier below like Pete Alonso. He averaged 3.44 head-to-head points per game last year. That's actually more than Paul Goldschmidt averaged. And maybe he won't be able to repeat that number that season completely, but I think it was mostly legit what he did last year in that resurgent season. So my guess is Joey Votto is going to be the one first baseman I wind up with most often. But of course, it kind of depends who I'm drafting with and whether or not they let me get him at that discount, which, by the way, on average, it's 145th that he's going.
Yeah, and represents one of the better values right now. Sleepers 1.0, I included Joey Votto in there. He was actually the poster child of my article there, and he's part of a group that I have dubbed the Profit Pocket at first base. So we'll talk about that group a little bit later on, and I'm just finding myself with a lot of players within that group. It's a quartet, by the way, but we'll get to that. Let's jump into ADP review and start with the man, Vladimir Guerrero. What a fantastic season for Vlad last year. The ADP is 4.7. He is the only first baseman going in the first round on ADP right now. He turns 23 years old in March. That didn't stop him last year. He finishes the first overall player in both roto and in head-to-head points. 641 points scored on CBS last year. Led all players, not just hitters. It led all pitchers as well. That's how amazing Vlad was last season. 311 batting average, 48 homers, 123 runs scored. That led baseball, 111 RBI, 4 steals as well. Finally, lowered that ground ball rate, raised the launch angle, and this was the outcome. Chris, my only question to you is the downside of Vladimir Guerrero. And we talked about this a little bit last week on our mailbag podcast, but a listener pointed out that in the games where he didn't play in Buffalo and Dunedin, which are fantastic hitters ballparks, not traditional MLB ballparks, outside of those parks, he hit 292 with an 892 OPS. So does that worry you at all when using a top 5 pick on Vladimir Guerrero?
Yeah, I mean, even like the first half versus second half splits, he had a 1089 OPS in the first half, hit 332 with 28 homers in 87 games. Was not nearly as good in the second half. That being said, 288, 20 homers in 74 games, 292 with an 890 OPS away from Dunedin and Buffalo. It's Freddie Freeman. Like that's I think the thing with Vladimir Guerrero is yes, there's some downside. Yes, maybe expecting him to be what he was last season is probably asking too much for him to do every year. That's a really, really high bar. And he would be a Hall of Famer if he did that every year. He would be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He would be Albert Pujols. And maybe he is. More likely outcome is he 100 and 1,000 OPS most seasons, which is what Freddie Freeman has done for most of his career. And Freddie Freeman's a perpetual first-round pick, perpetually one of the 15 best players in fantasy. So, like, the downside is you get a second-rounder with your number 1 overall pick or your number 4 overall pick, whatever it is. And that's not really much downside because most early-round picks don't return a profit on their price. That's just the way things work. You just want to avoid the disaster seasons. And Vladimir Guerrero has both incredible upside, as we saw last season, and a really, really high floor. So I don't think there's much risk. It's possible Maybe someone on this podcast will mention him as a possible bust candidate later. But even having said that,
I mean,
the bust potential is only, it's very unlikely he has a Cody Bellinger season.
Yeah. Well, hopefully not what Cody Bellinger did last year, right? I mean, it just completely fell apart for Bellinger. Yeah. But in terms of Vlad, I don't actually believe in what, happened outside of those ballparks, Dunedin and Buffalo. I just think it's a devil's advocate argument, something worth bringing up and talking about.
Well, I mean, you compare him since we're talking about, do you take him 2nd overall or do you take him 5th overall? And consider the other players you might consider taking in the top 5. I mean, obvious downside potential for Fernando Tatis with that shoulder.
With the shoulder, yeah.
Trey Turner and Juan Soto have not shown, at least over a full-length season, I mean, near the power upside that Vladimir Guerrero just gave us. And Juan Soto doesn't look like he's going to be much of a base stealer like we hoped for in the past. So, maybe you go with Jose Ramirez because of position scarcity, because of steal scarcity, but that's only the case in a categories league, obviously not in a points league. Like, Vladimir Guerrero seems among the safest choices you could take in that range. And so that's why I have him actually as my number 2 player in both formats.
All right. So you heard it there. Look, the floor is still incredibly high. The plate discipline is fantastic. Don't just think, all right, well, he's related to Vladimir Guerrero Sr., so he's got to be a similar player. It actually couldn't be more of the opposite. He has fantastic plate discipline. He walks a ton. He doesn't strike out. He doesn't really taste pitches outside of the strike zone, and he's part of one of the best lineups in baseball, hitting in the best division in baseball. Toronto, Fenway, Yankee Stadium, Camden. Of course, they're pushing the walls back a little bit there, but still a fantastic division to hit in for fantasy baseball. So Vlad, very worthy of a top 5 pick. So we'll get that out of the way, and let's move on to Freddie Freeman, who has an ADP of 19. He is going in the 2nd round, the only first baseman going in the 2nd round, 32 years old now, currently a free agent. And sorry, Scott, but we're seeing some whispers of the Yankees' interest in Freddie Freeman. I do predict that they'll wind up with one of him or Matt Olson, who we'll talk about in just a little bit. Scott, look, Freddie Freeman was awesome last year overall. I mean, the RBI output, not what you want to see, 83 RBI, but he batted 2nd for a lot of the year. He got off to a really, really slow start as well. But from June 1st on, 329 batting average, 19 homers, a 927 OPS. Those were Freddie Freeman numbers.
Yeah. No, I mean, he's awesome. He's been this guy for forever at this point, right? Basically, among the safest sources for batting average. Always worth a pick either at the end of round 1, round 2, always delivers on that draft price. And I think it would translate anywhere. I don't see him having like a huge boost if he wound up going to Yankee Stadium, because he does hit so many home runs to straightaway and to the opposite field. I think 37 is what StatCast gives him. Is where his batted balls. 37 is the number of home runs he would have had according to his spray chart at Yankee Stadium.
If he played every game,
right? If he played every game there, 37 as opposed to the 31 he actually hit. Well, some stadiums actually show more than 37 if he had played there. So it's not the sort of thing I put a lot of stock into anyway, and it's a hypothetical. I will say a part of me will die if he goes anywhere else but re-signing with Atlanta. You will see a lesser man here forevermore, because that would just be so heartbreaking. He's never once expressed interest in leaving Atlanta at all, and I have no idea why they let it get to this point without re-signing him, but it scares me.
They've got a lot of real estate holdings that they need to make sure they pay the debt service on.
Well, so, I mean, the profits they're getting from that are supposed to go back into the roster.
You and I had this argument like 2.5, 3 years ago, and you were like pounding the table. They're definitely going to put him back. The billionaires don't care about you. They don't care about the team.
They don't have an owner, Chris.
Exactly.
They are.
It's just the vague, nebulous billionaires. That's even worse.
Given a budget.
Look, I find it curious that the Braves did not get a deal done with Freddie Freeman before this lockout. So as weird as it sounds and as weird as it might look, I think that there's a real possibility that he winds up somewhere else. So I'm sorry to say it, Scott. Look, you've got to take it up with those Bravos because it doesn't really make sense. I mean, they have Ozzy Albies, they have Acuna on these fantastic deals, and for some reason they just don't have a deal done with Freddie Freeman. It is very odd. Chris, the only things that I'm looking at in terms of downside for Freddie Freeman, getting up there a little bit in age, 32 years old, we saw the ground ball rate creep all the way up to a career high 43% last year, and it was sub 40% every other season outside of 2011. So, as a player starts to get older, especially a slugger, you see that ground ball rate tick up. It worries me a little bit. It could be like the start of a power decline.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, his expected WOBA was the second highest he's had in the StatCast era. His WOBA on contact was actually the fourth highest in the last 7 years, so right in the middle. So nothing concerning there. High average exit velocity, barrel rate, all of it, and I guess you could see a small red flag there, but given the fact that we're going on 9 years of him hitting 300 with a 918 OPS, literally 9 years, 302 batting average, 918 OPS, and he was basically that last season, I don't see any reason to be concerned. It wouldn't shock me if Freddie Freeman was better than Vladimir Guerrero Jr. this season. And there seems to be so little downside with him. That's what you're getting at first base with these early picks. It's just a complete lack of things that could go wrong.
Yep, and I like Freddie Freeman regardless of format too. He's fantastic in head-to-head points because of his plate discipline. And in Roto, very sneakily, gave you 8 steals last year, and it's something he consistently does. And look, he's not a contributor, but he gives you something, usually 6 to 8 steals. It helps from the first base position. Let's move on to Matt Olson, who has an ADP of 35. He's going right around the 3-4 turn. Let's just marry him and Pete Alonso together here because I feel like we're going to talk about a lot of these guys together anyway. It feels like anytime we talk about one, we bring up the other one. Pete Alonso going about 16 picks later right now than Matt Olson, going in the 5th round. And Scott, as amazing as the season was for Matt Olson, it really was improvement, massive improvement in the strikeout rate last year, improved against left-handed pitching. He did regress in the second half where he hit 257 with an 878 OPS. It's still a very, very productive player, but it just so happens that during that same time frame, Pete Alonso was even better than Matt Olson, and he also cut down his strikeout rate. So it's just very odd to me that there's like this 1.5, 2-round discount between Matt Olson and Pete Alonso.
Yeah, I mean, I think the plan going forward for these two is whichever is coming off the worst year. That's the one you should probably be drafting because they're mirror images of each other. You got Olson, the left-handed hitter, Alonso, the right-handed hitter. Both could give you 40 homers any given year, and what makes the comparison all the more uncanny is that they both drastically improved their strikeout rate this past year. Olson had more room to improve. He went from being slightly worse to slightly better than Alonso, but he cut his strikeout rate down to about 16%, and Alonso got it under 20% for the first time. So, yeah, I mean, at the price, I'd rather have Alonso. I do like Olson just a little bit more because he walks more, but Alonso walks a fair amount too. And for the price difference, I expect to have more shares of Alonso.
Just how massive was that strikeout rate improvement for Matt Olson? He went from 31% in the shortened 2020 season, 16.8%, excuse me, was the strikeout rate in 2021 for Matt Olson. Now, much like Freddie Freeman, it seems like Matt Olson is going to wind up playing somewhere else. I don't know where that's going to be. He's been rumored to the Yankees. He's been rumored to the Braves. If they don't bring back Freddie Freeman, maybe they go after him. The Dodgers have kind of been linked to some first basemen as well. And it seems like the A's kind of want to tear this down and maybe start a rebuild. So Olson, Chapman, all those guys could be on the move. Chris, you see any defense for drafting Matt Olson at that 3-4 turn ahead of Pete Alonso? I know you love Pete Alonso, but do you see any justification in this ADP between the two right now?
Yeah, I mean, I just think the case against Matt Olson is just Pete Alonso exists. Pete Alonso exists and is cheaper, and Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if Matt Olson gets pushed up boards even more when he gets traded, just because anytime there's uncertainty about players, it tends to depress their prices a little bit. The similarities between them are uncanny. Since Pete Alonso came into the league, Alonso's hitting 256, Olson's hitting 257. Alonso has an 890 OPS, Olson has an 876 OPS. 215 runs to 202 for Alonso, 249 to 244 in RBI. Alonso does have 23 more home runs. That's nothing, not nothing. So yeah, I think on the whole, it wouldn't, like, I think you flip a coin. And since Olson's cheaper, you just take that, or Alonso's cheaper, you just take that quarter. But I guess the argument against both of them is this is not an especially hard profile, difficult profile to replace. It's basically home runs and then RBI and runs because of home runs. But it's difficult to replace 50 homer potential or 45 homer potential. You know, it's just a question of if they hit 33 home runs, they're probably pretty easy to replace or not irreplaceable. They
do have on base ability beyond, you know, like a
sure,
a
but
Ryan
I guess in a roto league,
or I mean that influences the runs scored too in a pretty significant way. But yeah, and then of course in a points league, there's even more separation.
But yeah, if they hit 40 home runs, they're irreplaceable. If they hit 33, then it starts to, you know, you're probably not going to get a lot of profit from them. So that's the only thing, is it's just a profile that you don't love paying up for, but I will draft either one of them.
Yeah, I would say the biggest difference between someone like Olson and Pete Alonso and let's say Rhys Hoskins, who's going 80 to 100 picks later, who happens to be a player that I like quite a bit, is I just think the batting average upside, right? Like we know at this point, Hoskins is going to hit 240. He's going to actively hurt your batting average when he plays much better in a points league because he walks a ton. Mm-hmm. But, you know, Matt Olson, you know, he just hit 270 over the course of a full season. Like that's a big difference. A 30-point difference in batting average. That's huge. And Pete Alonso, he actually hit over 280 in his minor league career, 290 career hitter in the minor. So we haven't seen that yet, but I always kind of thought there was like room for upside in the batting average department for Pete Alonso. Absolutely. I wouldn't project it, but I think it's possible based on this strikeout rate, this improved strikeout rate that he showed last season as well.
And it's worth noting in Matt Olson's case in particular, whatever they call that stadium now, I don't think it's O.co anymore, is one of the hardest places in baseball to hit. And his OPS for his career is 40 points higher on the road. Most players hit better at home, even in a neutral environment, than on the road. So there is upside beyond that just because of a potential venue change.
That would be Ring Central Coliseum, Chris, is where the Oakland A's play, which if you gave me 100 guesses, would not have been able to guess.
Sure.
Ring Central.
Sure. Alameda County Stadium. Isn't that what it used to be? Something like that?
Anyway, I just want to put a ball in this conversation. I don't want us to sound like we don't like Matt Olson. He's a fantastic player. It's just the cost is a bit prohibitive going here at the 3-4 turn. Let's take a look at Paul Goldschmidt, who has an ADP of 48.7. So he's going about one round later on average than a Matt Olson and just ahead of Pete Alonso. And much like Joey Votto, it was a renaissance season for Paul Goldschmidt last year, where he finished as the 53rd overall player he finished as the 14th overall player in Roto last season, and he averaged 3.4 fantasy points per game. So just fantastic marks regardless of format. 294 batting average, 31 homers, 102 runs scored, 99 RBI, and 12 steals. Chris, we'll start with you this time. When it comes to Paul Goldschmidt, how much are you actually buying into this renaissance season from Goldie? Because, you know, he struggled with batting average in 2019, and then he struggled with power in the shortened 2020. And then basically in 2021, he just turned back into like the Paul Goldschmidt of old. So how much do you actually buy it?
I think he probably need to be skeptical about it just because he's a 34-year-old who turned around a declining season. And unlike Joey Votto, you're paying full price for it. You're paying full freight for what Paul Goldschmidt did. You're not getting a real discount here. The underlying numbers were better than what he actually produced, which is the kind of fly in the ointment there that makes it a little harder to make that case. But yeah, look, he's at the age where a fall off is entirely possible. It's not likely at this point, but the athleticism's definitely taken a hit. His sprint speed's down to 34%. He is aging, and at some point that tends to catch up with you. And we thought that was happening already. Maybe, he's made adjustments, and now it's time for the league to adjust to him. And what does that look like? I don't know, but he's not Nelson Cruz-esque in terms of being an outlier on batted ball quality, at least not consistently. Last season, he was really good. So if
last season he was 93rd percentile average exit velocity, but it was a turnaround like that in the history of StatCast, which I guess goes back to his prime years with the Diamondbacks. That's the hardest exit velocity, the highest hard hit rate too. That was 91st percentile that he's ever produced. So I mean, just in a vacuum, I'm inclined to believe that the turnaround was legit, but I kind of expected there to be more skepticism. I expected there to be. I expected people not to price him as if his 2021 was totally legit, and since it seems like they are, I'm not that interested in drafting him. So he's going in round 4 on average, right?
Yeah, around the 4-5 turn. So
yeah, around the 4-5 turn. Now, if he's there in round 6, which probably means Alonso's already gone off the board. Alonso's ADP is just, a couple spots lower than Goldschmidt. So they go about the same spot. If Alonso's already gone, Olson, of course, is gone. Goldschmidt is there, and we get into round 6. Okay, I mean I'll take him, sure.
I would rather have him than Jose Abreu.
Yeah,
for sure.
Right, but I just think there isn't any kind of risk being factored into his ADP right now, which for all the reasons Chris gave, he deserves some dose of skepticism.
Yeah, that is fair. Of the first baseman we've talked about thus far, Goldschmidt is actually the one that I want to draft the most, just based on the profile and what he did last year. I mean, the fact that he contributes batting average, gives you that out of position speed, the 12 steals last year, which I'm a little bit skeptical of.
Yeah,
myself.
I mean, because Chris pointed to the fact that his sprint speed has declined over the years. He was 12 for 12 in steals last year, and folks who've been playing fantasy baseball for a long time will remember he had a 3-year stretch with the Diamondbacks: 21 steals, 32 steals, 18 steals. He was like the one base stealer at the position. But then he went basically 3 years where he wasn't stealing any bases at all, and comes back with 12, even though he's slower now. So I'm not really counting on the steals continuing. That's the one stat that I'm least trusting in.
He had 5 attempts in his first 219 games with the Cardinals before going 12 for 12 last season. And obviously, like 12 for 12, that's completely unsustainable. And if he went 8 for 12 next season, that would still be really good. But I don't know if you can count on the 12 stolen base attempts.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, if he gives you 6 to 8, but even without that, I mean, the fact that he just contributes in all the other 4 categories, his batting average the last 5 seasons, 294, 304, 260, 290, 297. I mean, there's a very clear outlier back in 2019 when he hit 260, and he made adjustments last year. He was more aggressive. He swung more than swung more than
I like that though. Swang.
He swang more than he has.
English is stupid.
Yeah, I mean, why even speak it, right? He swung more than he has in years past. The strikeout rate was down, and you guys mentioned the quality of contact, right? Like, this guy is, I don't know, is this a take? Is he like a borderline Hall of Famer? Like, he's had a fantastic career, and his batted ball metrics were better last year than they've ever been. So maybe that's due to the ball. But, it was a little like the exit velocities were a little bit pushed up because of it. But overall, everything trusts what Paul Goldschmidt did last year. So if you're asking me, like, I'm on the clock in the 5th round, and him, Olson, and Alonso are all available for some reason, I'm taking Paul Goldschmidt. I haven't ranked the highest. So I do like him. I haven't wound up with him yet, but I hope to do so.
It'll probably go fine, but he does seem like the riskiest first baseman we've mentioned so far.
Yeah, that's probably fair because of the age. Let's move on to Jose Abreu, who has an ADP of 69.3, being drafted in the 6th round, just turned 35 years old in January. And it was a bit of a down year, specifically in terms of batting average for Jose Abreu last year. 261 batting average, 30 homers, 86 runs scored, 117 RBI. If there's one thing you can count on him for, it is that RBI category. 100 plus in 6 of 7 full seasons. 788 RBI since he entered the league in 2014. That is second behind only Nolan Arenado.
Let's not forget 60 and 60 games in 2021.
Yeah, when he won the MVP. So whoever was counting on regression last year and did not want to buy him at his increased cost, was like a 3rd or 4th round pick. Good on you, because that was obviously the right call here. Chris, where are you at on Jose Abreu at this point? I mean, I don't know if he's going to be a contributor in batting average anymore, but it seems like he's going to help you in the other 3 categories. We know he gives you no speed at all. So where are you at on Jose Abreu?
Yeah, he's an interesting one because the RBI numbers are just so consistently better than what you would expect from his overall production. And it's like the White Sox have a good lineup, but it's not a good lineup that has a ton of guys who get on base. Like, he's not batting with the runners on base all the time. And so it's a weird combination. He does seem to just hit better with runners on base, and that appears to be a consistent skill that he has. His overall production outside of RBI tends to be, not great for the first base position, but when he's healthy, you can pretty much count on close to 30 home runs, if not a little more than 30 home runs. The run numbers will be fine. They won't be great. So, yeah, I think he's perfectly fine. The problem is he's 35. And so what if he's all of a sudden not? He's really relying on being an outlier in terms of RBI production, because he is often sort of just fine in terms of production at first base otherwise. So that's the concern, is that if he has an outlier down season in terms of run production or production with runners on base or whatever, which can certainly happen, then he starts to look pretty fringy.
Well, he had also been a reliable source of batting average previously, still a career 290 hitter.
Yeah.
But he did hit 261 last year. He is getting older. His strikeout rate has been going up in recent years.
In 2 of the last 4, he's hit 260.
Yeah. But,
He was injured that year.
The 2 in between, he hit very well.
Yes.
So, yeah, I do think, yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with what Chris said. I would add that I only tier him with the previous 3, Alonso, Goldschmidt, and Olson, for a categories league, a roto league, 5x5 league, whatever you want to call it. He actually did walk a fair amount last year, but that was a total outlier. And normally he doesn't walk much at all. And strikeout rates are on the rise, as I said. In points leagues, I would actually rather have Votto than Abreu straight up.
Yeah, and they are going wildly different in terms of draft costs right now. Jose Abreu, I mentioned the ADP is 69.3. Joey Votto going at pick 148 right now. So almost 80 picks later than Jose Abreu. So quite the discount, especially for those playing in points leagues. Here's what I'll say about Jose Abreu. Anyone who's listened to this podcast, watched this podcast since I have joined, you know that I am a Jose Abreu truther. I'm a fan of Jose Abreu. If you don't think that he can bounce back in terms of batting average, you should not be drafting him at this cost. Unless you think he's going to hit 280 plus for some reason, which, he's done many times before, but he's getting older. I don't know if you can trust that anymore. I really don't know how much different he is than somebody like Josh Bell or CJ Cron, who's going much, much later than him. And we'll talk about that group, but I just don't really know. Like RBI, sure, he's going to stand out. He'll be better than those guys. But if he hits 260 to 270, I just really don't think he's going to be much different than those names that I mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like an assurance pick, right? Like there are a lot more things that could go wrong for CJ Cron than for Jose Abreu. Yeah. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I don't expect to have many shares of Abreu myself.
Yeah, it's just a very high floor when you're talking about Jose Abreu. We're going to take a quick break, but before we do that, we have another live mock draft stream coming up this Wednesday night, February 9th at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. This time we have a 12-team head-to-head points redraft mock. So before we did a 12-team head-to-head points startup dynasty mock draft, this time it will be 12-team head-to-head points redraft mock. We'll also be recording a mailbag pod afterwards, so please send in your questions. Email us at fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. That's the letter I. Put mailbag in the subject, or leave a 5-star rating on Apple and leave your question in the review. We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we will do we want to talk about this glob of first baseman, or do we want to do sleepers, breakouts, and busts? Let's do sleepers, breakouts, and busts. We'll do that here on Fantasy Baseball today. All right, so before we get to the glob or the blob, whatever you want to call it, there's just like all these first basemen which seem like they're kind of similar. We'll get to them, but let's do sleepers, breakouts, and busts first. And Scotty, we will start with you. Your number one sleeper is blank.
It's Luke Voit. Luke Voit is numero uno as far as the sleepers go. I've made the case before, but I will make it again since this is the first base preview after all. And that is that there's really no reason for the Yankees to move on from Luke Voit. There's no reason for any of us to move on from Luke Voit. He spent much of last year injured. He was playing injured part of the year, dragged down his numbers. And even after he returned, because the Yankees had replaced him with Anthony Rizzo, he wasn't getting very consistent playing time. So it's understandable why his numbers took a step back in 2021. But in 2020, he led the majors in home runs. And in fact, since joining the Yankees near the end of the 2018 season, he's hit 271 with a 901 OPS and has homered at a higher rate during that stretch than Matt Olson. So he has been a top 5 caliber first baseman when he's been healthy enough to play. He, and that's including the bad stretches, by the way, 271, 901. When you just include the healthy stretches, he's been even better than that. Because remember, in 2019, his second half was marred by the sports hernia that he tried playing through after having like an all-star caliber first half. He's still only 31. So, it's not reasonable to think he's in decline yet. Every time he's been healthy and has gotten consistent at bats, he has delivered with the Yankees. Currently, he's in line to be their starting first baseman because Anthony Rizzo's a free agent. They could bring Rizzo back. They could trade for Olson. They could sign Freddie Freeman. But they don't need to because Voit is there. And even if they do, it would make sense for them to trade Voit to somebody else. So, as long as he's in line to start for somebody, I think he's at worst worth drafting as a corner infielder in fantasy with the potential, again, to be a top 5 first baseman. Currently, he's the 250th player off the board on average. So that is just like,
it's ridiculous.
That is the most outrageous discount, I think, in the entire player pool.
Yeah, it's just people assuming that he is not going to be on the Yankees or he's going to be a backup player. But I would call him a risk-reward player, but there is no risk involved when you're talking about a player going that late. I mean, his overall ADP, 256.3. So by the time you're drafting, you're probably going to know what's going on with Luke Voit, whether he's starting for the Yankees, which I don't believe. I think there's more than a 50% chance they either sign Freddie Freeman, trade for Matt Olson, or even just bring back an Anthony Rizzo to get a left-handed bat in there and improve defense. So I do not think Luke Voit will be the starting first baseman for the Yankees, but he probably will be the starting first baseman for somebody. So even at this cost, I think he's worth it as well. Chris, what would you like to add on your sleeper, Luke Voit?
I think Scott pretty much covered it. He's awesome. And I don't know.
Me or Luke Voit?
What's that? Yeah.
You said he's awesome.
Yes.
Who was he? Who was the antecedent?
Yes.
Okay.
Both.
Even if Voit isn't starting for the Yankees, it's hard to believe that he wouldn't start somewhere, right? Like they're just going to keep him on the bench. That seems unlikely. They would probably trade him for something. That's my hope anyway. I just think he's too good not to play every day. He's proven himself as one of the best hitters at first base when he's healthy, and I think he'll be that when he's healthy. So if the worst thing that you can say about a player is that they have trouble staying healthy, I'm going to like them more than the consensus. And that is the case with Luke Voit.
What do you call those big, beefy baseball guys, Chris?
A big, beefy baseball boy. He is a big, beefy baseball boy. A little different than like a Vlad Guerrero. They're both big, beefy baseball boys, but it's distributed differently. But I love them both the same.
Yeah. Luke Voit, you watch him play. I mean, this guy is like...
I mean, can we get like
natural tough? I don't know. Like he's someone who's like flipping tires somewhere.
Can we get him like one size larger on the jersey? Like just the poor jersey looks like it's gonna rip every time it flexes.
You're right. That is a tight jersey for Luke Voit. He is not in the same way that we've talked about big beefy baseball boys in the past, but he's one of them.
There's all kinds of big beefy baseball boys. They come in all shapes and sizes.
All shapes and sizes. No discrimination here when it comes to the big beefy baseball boys. All right, the sleepers for me. I have a feeling you guys probably won't be as excited about these guys as I am. Nathaniel Lowe. We were talking about him before the podcast started. I think maybe it was at the top of the podcast. Whatever. I've got to
like
talk
the
about
other guy that you have listed more.
I'm going to talk about both of them really quickly. Nathaniel Lowe, his ADP is 250 right now. He hits way too many ground balls. I understand 54% last year. Well, the plate discipline is still really strong. 12.5% walk rate, 25% strikeout rate. He's going to start at first base for the Texas Rangers. A much improved lineup. Corey Seager there now. Marcus Semien. If for some reason he lowers this ground ball rate, because it has been lower in the minors and his other stops in the majors, then I think we could see a bigger power output from Nathaniel Lowe. Hitting in the middle of this lineup, he's going to play against lefties and righties. He has really, really strong splits. Don't give up yet. I think we could still see something out of Nate Lowe. The other one I wanted to mention was Brandon Belt. If you're looking for this year's Joey Votto, look no further than Brandon Belt. The ADP is 238.7. Yes, he's older, can't really stay healthy, but he has been amazing. It's the start of 2020. That is 148 games, 285 batting average, 38 homers, a 988 OPS, including the shortened season and last year. The Giants
90
keep
runs,
finding
89 RBI.
The Giants keep finding a way to do this with their pitchers, their hitters. They're turning everybody around. Brandon Crawford, awesome season last year. For where he's going, if you get Brandon Belt as your corner infielder in a roto league, even though he's going to miss time, the games that he plays, I think he's going to be really, really good. So
it was a 48 homer pace. Last year's home run pace over 162 games is 48. But he's, of course, not going to play 162 games because they sit him so much against lefties.
They sit him against lefties. He's going to miss time with injury. Sure. But at his cost, when he plays, he's really, really damn good.
That since 2020 number, he is tied with Ronald Acuna for 40th in the majors in home runs since the start of 2020. He is just behind Ronald Acuna at 187th in plate appearances in that time. He's done that 38 homers and 560 plate appearances. He's been ridiculously good the past 2 seasons. So, if my thing is the worst thing you can say about a player is he can't stay healthy, I'll like him more. Frank's is certainly he hits too many ground balls. And I think those are both valid reasons to be somewhat optimistic on players.
I thought you were going to say if someone plays for the Texas Rangers, they just automatically have an attachment to my heart, which is usually
it's
true.
Mostly the ground balls thing, I think.
Can I talk about my backup sleeper at first base since you did?
Yeah, go ahead.
Frank Schwindel.
Frankie 2 hits.
Frankie 2 hits. Yep. Now, it'd be different if everybody was treating last year's performance at face value because, it was beyond anything anyone could reasonably sustain. He hit 326 with a 962 OPS, and since after joining the Cubs, so in about 2 months' time, not a tiny sample, by the way, but 2 months' time, 342 with a 1002 OPS. Obviously, he can't do that over a full season, but nobody wants him. So he's the 213th player off the board on average. And I like betting on the guys nobody wants, especially when they do something that superlative, because there's a good chance there's something there. You look at his minor league track record. He always hit well. Especially for average, but he showed the ability to hit the ball over the fence too. I think the reason he got stuck in the minors till age 29 and bouncing between, I think, 4 different organizations is just because first baseman exclusively who bats right-handed and doesn't walk much. It's just hard to find a path to the majors with that profile. Mm-hmm. And he finally got a chance on a rebuilding team. They traded Rizzo away. They needed somebody to plug in, and he was great. So I think he could be like a more powerful Yuli Gurriel and would be well worth a late round pick as a corner infielder. Maybe not. Maybe he'll bust in April and get sent down and we'll never hear from him again. But at the cost, why not take the shot on him?
That's what's so crazy about the first base position. And you're probably figuring this out by now, is that his ADP is 219.3. I mentioned Brandon Belt, Nathaniel Lowe. You guys talked about Luke Voigt. It's deep, man, especially if you play in roto and you need that corner infielder or a late round utility bat. There's a good chance you're winding up with a first baseman. So why do we call Frank Schwindel Frankie 2 hits, by the way? Last year, it felt like he was getting 2 hits every other game, Scott. We would come on here and we're just like, all right, well, another 2-hit performance.
He won a lot of people championships last year.
Yeah, for Frank Schwindel. How often did he actually do that? He played 55 games with the Cubs. he had multiple hits in 25 of those. So legitimately almost every other game, he had multiple hits. So an awesome season from Frank Schwindel. Let's quickly move through our breakouts and busts. We still have a lot of players to talk about. Chris, give us your breakout real quick.
Pete Alonso, we've already pretty much covered it, but I would just point out that I think there's room for him to take that Matt Olson-esque jump that Matt Olson had last season because of the improved contact rate, because of the underlying, not just the strikeout rate, but the underlying contact numbers all look much better than they did as a rookie. And he did that. I mean, you remember he hit 53 home runs as a rookie. He did that with batted ball metrics that were just as good as his rookie season, if not a little better. And his expected WOBA was actually slightly higher than his rookie season. So I do think there is room for Pete Alonso to, have a 275-40 season with 225 combined runs and RBI. I think there's just room for a legitimate, borderline first round or top 20 overall player there.
Wow.
That would be a worse season than the year he actually hit 53 home runs, for what it's worth.
Probably. Maybe the runs and RBI I was a little low on. I'm not sure. But yeah.
I just have to point it out because I'm sure somebody's screaming that.
You don't have to point it out.
I have to point it out. He had 53 home runs as a rookie.
Chris, I was going to say, you chose...
Oh, he only had 223 runs in RBI. I said he was going to have 225. Much better.
You chose Pete Alonso, Chris. I was going to say, you're probably one of those people who would predict Giancarlo Stanton to break out, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Scott, who do you got as a breakout here at first base?
My breakout's a little lower end. I'm going to go Alex Kirilloff as my breakout. Of course, he's eligible in the outfield as well. But he took us on a ride his rookie season last year. He really did. Because remember, we hyped him a lot during the preseason. I did especially. He got off to a 3-for-26 start. Everybody's like, what's going on with this guy? And then he had these 4 amazing games where he hit 4 home runs and 2 doubles. But the thing was, even when he got off to that 3-for-26 start, the data loved him. StatCast said he should be killing it. And Aaron Gleeman, I forget who he's with, but Aaron Gleeman on Twitter, I saved this tweet from July. As you'll remember, not long after that, Kirilloff suffered a wrist injury that he then attempted to play through. It was actually a torn ligament in the wrist. He played through it for a couple more months. Didn't do great, eventually gave in and had surgery mid-season. So this was a tweet from Aaron Gleeman in July. Before the wrist injury, his expected batting average was 317. His average exit velocity, 96.5 miles per hour. His hard hit rate, 63%. And then after it still wasn't that bad. 281 expected batting average, 89.7 average exit velocity. That's a little low. 40% hard hit rate, but that's still serviceable numbers. And that was playing with a torn ligament in his wrist. And if you look at his minor league track record, it was a monster in 2018, kind of scuffled in 2019 when he was also playing through a wrist injury. He's had it surgically corrected now. So hopefully this is completely behind him and he can get to clobbering the ball like I think he can next year.
Shout out to Alex Kirilloff. He was born on a fantastic day, November 9th. We share a birthday. So shout out to Alex Kirilloff. He's much younger, though. Obviously, he's only 24 years old. I'm just very interested to see, Scott, how does he return from this wrist injury? Apparently, this is something that has hampered him dating back to his days in the minors as well.
So, that 2019 season in the minors was also a disappointment because of the wrist. Yeah, but in 2018, the year that really put him on the prospect map, he had 348 with a 970 OPS. He was ridiculous.
Yeah. So I'm happy to see that he finally got that corrected. It's just, how will he bounce back now? You're right. I mean, the StatCast numbers were fantastic. And on top of that, I love when a young player performs well as a left-handed batter against left-handed pitching. And that's exactly what Alex Kirilloff did last season. For me, the breakout, you're probably going to say, well, this guy already broke out once before, but he's not really being drafted like it. And he's never really put together the full package. And I think he's capable of doing so if he could just stay healthy. So you're probably going to like this guy, Chris. Rhys Hoskins, who last year hit 247, 27 home runs over 107 games, a 150-game pace, 37 homers, 99 RBI. It was kind of a weird season for him where the first 4 months of the season, April through June, first 3 months, it wasn't really great. There was some stuff going on with his plate discipline. But then July and August was just ridiculous. 323 batting average, a 1224 OPS. He hits a ton of fly balls. And last year, normally Rhys Hoskins would hit the ball in the air, but he wouldn't do so with authority. He wouldn't hit the ball hard. Last year, it was much different. A 94th percentile in terms of barrel rate. 17% was the mark there. So he walks a lot. Strikeout rate is definitely manageable. It's a good ballpark to hit in. Solid lineup around him. They're talking about potentially adding another outfielder, whether that's Conforto or Nick Castellanos. I just think that there's a ton to like with Hoskins. He just has to stay on the field. He missed 55 games last year with a left groin strain, and then he had abdominal surgery. So you worry about those things, but at the cost, 143.7, I'm all about it. Real quick, the bust. Scott, we'll go to you. Let's make it quick.
Yeah, Ryan Mountcastle, he's the bust I'm most confident in, regardless of positions. I had him as a bust even before they announced the changes to Camden Yards, because his profile was totally dependent on how many home runs he hit. 33 last year. Doesn't get on base much, strikes out more than I'd like. Not a good source of batting average. It doesn't look like his profile so far lends itself to that. And he just didn't impact the ball hard enough to end up with 33 home runs, 45th percentile average exit velocity. And now Camden Yards, they pushed the fences back 30 feet in left field. And if you do like a park overlay, Camden Yards and every other park in the majors, it looks like now the most difficult place to hit a home run to straightaway left field, which is it could kill a right-handed power hitter like Ryan Mountcastle, who I think hit 2/3 of his home runs at Camden Yards last year. So, yeah, I mean, I was thinking, okay, maybe he's like a 25 homer guy, really, instead of a 33 homer guy. But with that change to the park, now I'm not even confident he's going to get to 20 home runs. And there's really not much else to go with that home run total for him.
All right, Scotty, I'm going to swoop in here. I'm going to steal your homework. I'm going to change a few different things to make sure that the teacher can't tell. But I'm with you. Ryan Mountcastle is my bust at the position. And he hit 22 of 33 home runs in Camden last year. So you're right, exactly 2/3 of his home runs. Overall, batting average, OPS, much better at home last season. And Derek Hardy put out a thread. Derek Hardy, super smart dude. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. He does the BAT and the BAT X projections, which you can find over on Fangraphs. He lowered Ryan Mountcastle's home run projection from 32 to 28. So that's pretty significant. A 4 home run drop there. And on top of all this, average home run distance for Ryan Mountcastle last year, 396 feet. That was tied for 93rd among qualified hitters out of 132. So really not a great mark for one Ryan Mountcastle. Chris, who do you have as your bust at first base?
I think Ryan Mountcastle is the right answer. But we already talked about Paul Goldschmidt and the ways that things could go wrong for him because of mostly his age, but also the recent track record not being as good as it was last season. I just think there's room for him to fall off. And then have to mention Vladimir Guerrero in a small whisper, just for the potential that maybe he drops to like an 870 OPS bat. Maybe the floor is a little lower than we think, and maybe he's more like a top 50 hitter rather than a top 25 hitter as his floor. I think that's possible. It's not especially likely. I'm not avoiding Vladimir Guerrero, but just to note for the record the possibility of that.
Yeah, and along those same lines, I'll throw Matt Olson in that category as well. Everyone just assumes if he goes to a new park that he's automatically going to hit better. We see guys struggle all the time. Their first year in a new spot. So there's a chance if he goes to Yankee Stadium, sure, he's just absolutely awesome. Also,
I feel like there are a lot more guys with downside risk than those two.
Yeah, no, I don't
like
think
a Jared Walsh. I mean, come on.
Sure, but there's not as much risk there because of the price. But yes, I do agree. Jared Walsh is probably being overdrafted. I don't love paying for the middle class at first base in general, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
He's kind of like if Olson and Pete Alonso are mirror images, then Walsh and Mountcastle are. I feel like, although Walsh has elevation problems too. He puts the ball on the ground too much. But yeah, he also didn't hit the ball as hard as his home run total would have you believe last year.
Yeah, I guess Anaheim's a little above sea level.
Matt Olson, by the way, like he's not a bust because I think he's going to completely like bottom out. I just think he's a little bit overvalued at his price.
I'll say I think he could bottom out. Like it's a risky profile if he can't sustain the strikeout rate improvements. And as we saw with Cody Bellinger, you can't always just assume that that's going to stick.
All right, let's get to the Glob here, which I have dubbed. We have 9 first basemen going between picks 110 and 150. It's that middle class that you're talking about, Chris. And we've already talked about one of these names, and that is Ryan Mountcastle. We have 3 that are going between picks 110 and 115 in the 10th round. Ryan Mountcastle at pick 111.7, Max Muncy at pick 115.3, and then Jared Walsh at pick also 115.3. Exactly the same as Max Muncy. Scott, I mean, real quick on Max Muncy, people are probably freaking out. How have you not talked about Max Muncy at this point? He was awesome last year. There's no doubt about that. 249 batting average, 36 home runs, 95 runs, 94 RBI. The problem is that he is dealing with a torn UCL, which he admitted back in November was healing very slowly. So we just don't know. Like, the range of outcomes is Max Muncy is healthy and he's amazing and he's a huge discount. The other possibility is that he plays a month and he needs Tommy John surgery. So that's the risk with Max Muncy right now.
Or that he just doesn't play at all.
Sure.
So, yeah.
All right.
I would much rather take the risk on Max Muncy than either Jared Walsh or Ryan Mountcastle, just because I think the ceiling is so much higher. And I think the floor for all 3 of them is you just drop them in April. Like, I think that it's not going to happen for Max Muncy because of production. It could very well happen for Ryan Mountcastle and Jared Walsh. And so give me the guy who, if he's healthy, is probably going to be a top 60 player, rather than the 2 guys who I don't think have that kind of upside. And Max Muncy can be better than that even.
Yeah, Jared Walsh. I do want to quickly give him some credit. I mean, he did have a very good season last year, 277 batting average, 29 homers, 98 RBI, and he did that despite no Mike Trout or Anthony Rendon for a majority of the season. The problem is the StatCast data did not love him. You know, he didn't really have inspiring batted ball metrics, a 48% ground ball rate for a lefty who is going to hit a lot of those ground balls into the shift. I think that could hurt his batting average. And then he's just awful against lefties, 170 batting average, a 565 OPS. So again, like, I don't really think he's much different than this next group that we're going to talk about. And he's going like 30 to 40 picks higher. So I'm out on Jared Walsh.
Same.
All right. Scott is also out on Jared Walsh. Let's move on to these next two who have triple eligibility, and both are going right around pick 120. So the round 10, 11 turn, and that includes Jake Cronenworth at pick 119.3, and then DJ LeMahieu, who is going at pick 121. Jake Cronenworth, a very solid season overall. I mean, the final stat line kind of dropped off a little bit because he was playing through a fractured ring finger in the final month of the season, which kind of brought some of his numbers down. And then DJ LeMahieu, 33 years old. We were worried about what his numbers would look like without the bouncy ball last year. And then it turns out that after the season, he was playing through a sports hernia. So he had surgery on that, right after the season ended. Scott, both of these guys going around the same spot right now, Jake Cronenworth and DJ LeMahieu. Do you like either? Do you actually find yourself targeting either one of these guys? Probably not even at first base, though, I would imagine. Maybe like at second.
Yeah.
Yeah,
more likely one of the other places that they're eligible. I like Cronenworth more. I think there's more batting average potential than he showed last year. That's kind of the downside for him. He hitting the 260s. I think LeMahieu, maybe he could be a batting average specialist, a run scoring specialist still, but I'm kind of out on him as just a general mixed league asset because I think the ball change explains everything for him. It just he so rarely elevates. He relied on this outlier home run to fly ball rate that I'm just not sure he's capable of putting together with the new ball anymore.
Yeah. Chris, for Jake Cronenworth, he had 266. The expected batting average was 280. So, potentially even a little bit unlucky last year. Really strong plate discipline. So I think that helps him in points leagues. If I'm taking one of these guys, it's going to be Jake Cronenworth. I'm not sure that he has a massive ceiling, but I do think he's actually a pretty high floor player.
I think there's room for him to run more.
Right, I agree.
You look at the minor league numbers, and he was right around like 20 stolen bases per 150 games. Not at a great success rate, obviously, so that's a little concerning. But he was 86th percentile in sprint speed last season, so he's pretty fast. And so I do think there's the potential for a 20 homer, 10 steal season while hitting 280, and that would be very valuable. I also will say I was a big skeptic of DJ LeMahieu last season. I'm probably not as low on him as Scott is. He had a 340 expected WOBA, which actually wasn't far off from where he was in 2020 when he was at 368. He just underperformed it and had a 315 actual WOBA. His expected batting average 283. Expected slug was 397, so I agree the power's not there. But I still think he could be someone who hits 290 and scores over 100 runs. And that's going to have value, especially in a points league, because his plate discipline is still going to be really, really good. And, I think there's still room for DJ LeMahieu to be a useful fantasy starter, even if the idea of him being a superstar looks pretty silly in the light of day now.
Yeah, I think the days of the power are gone. I mean, the home run to fly ball ratio by year with the Yankees, 19.3% in 2019, 27% in 2020, 7.7% in 2021. So, maybe he's, 12 to 15 home runs at this point. But I will agree. Like, I haven't wound up with LeMahieu yet myself, but I think he still can be a useful player regardless of format for the reasons you mentioned in points leagues. And in Roto, it's kind of hard to find that profile in the middle of the draft, someone that helps in batting average and could potentially score 100 runs. So,
well, and realistically, you're going to draft him as a third baseman because that position is just so bad. And,
sure.
And like you need whatever you can get there.
For sure. This next group of four. So like there's these mini groups within the glob. It's like it's a glob, but then there's also like sub globs.
There's globs, globs within globs. It's
globs
all the way down.
Lots of globs here. This group of four. This is the one that I have dubbed the Profit Pocket. So the reason why, and it's not really a great name. If anyone else wants to come up with something better, please help me out, because I waste so much time thinking about this too. Like I was looking up synonyms for the word group, and it was awful. Anyway, with the exception of Rhys Hoskins because he got hurt last year, all of these players finished inside the top 95 players in Roto last season. Yet all of their ADPs are between 138 and 148 right now. So it's a very clear profit in my opinion, and for some of them, I actually think there's upside to be much better than that. So it includes Josh Bell at pick 138.3, CJ Cron at 138.7, Rhys Hoskins at 143.7, and then Joey Votto at 148. Chris, this is the group that I find myself drafting first baseman from most, and I think you could just kind of break it down by format too. Like in a points league, if I get Hoskins or Votto, love it. In a Roto league, if I get Cron or Josh Bell, guys that can give me 25 to 30 home runs without hurting my batting average, I love it. This is the group that I find myself drafting for most.
Yeah, I think Joey Votto is the clear best player here. And I imagine Scott agrees. I have him as the number 7 first baseman in both formats, and I imagine Scott's pretty close to that.
Yep.
And it's mostly just because I really, really buy what he did last season and the improvements that he made. And, we saw a little bit of it in September of 2020 as well, when he started hitting more fly balls, sacrificing a little bit of contact for power. So I think that's real.
He said that's what he wanted to do, and then he went out there and did it.
Joey Votto is the kind of player who is unusually candid about his process and what he's trying to do as a hitter. It's one of the best things about him, I think. And he's also very consistent in following up what he says. And I remember a quote from like 4 or 5 years ago where he basically said, like, at some point, I'm probably going to have to sacrifice to hit for power as I get older because the bat speed's not going to be there and I'm not going to be able to do it the same way. He's, the smartest hitter in baseball probably, so there's a lot of reasons to believe in him, and he's still super talented. I like the rest of them fine.
And the other thing with Votto is he missed a month with a fractured thumb and still hit the 36 home runs, right? He hit 31 of them in just the final 2/3 of the season. So like you give him an extra month, he can afford to take a step back. For the 4, though, and Rhys Hoskins, CJ Cron, Josh Bell being the others, like I like all 4 of these guys more than Mountcastle, Walsh, Cronenworth, and LeMahieu, who we all see going ahead of them. So I agree with your overall assessment. I mean, CJ Cron, he mashed at Colorado the way, we always expect these hitters to take a big step forward there, and sometimes they disappoint us. Cron didn't, and I think is being undervalued as a guy who could help in batting average and home runs. Hoskins, he might be the single player now since Carlos Santana seems to not really be a contributor anymore. Hoskins might be the single biggest player with the biggest difference between his points and 5x5 value. In points leagues, he averaged 3.21, exactly the same as Jose Abreu last year. So he is definitely deserves to be ranked higher in that format. And then Josh Bell, this was the number I was looking up before the show. And I was surprised even how it came out. So we've talked about how Josh Bell was a disaster in April, and it kind of brought down his season-long numbers. May 1st on 279, 25 homers, and 865 OPS. Very good, right? So I wanted to see what his point per game average was from May 1st on, and it was 3.01, just the same as CJ Cron. Okay, that's pretty good. He came off the bench for so many of those games that it obviously skews the point per game line. Remember, they had Ryan Zimmerman. They were mixing in at bats. Who knows if he's going to be around? Even if he is, they got the DH spot. Bell starting more consistently as the year went on. Just as a starter from May 1st on, Josh Bell averaged 3.56 fantasy points per game, which would have put him behind only Vladimir, Guerrero, and Matt Olson. He had more than Freddie Freeman even points per game during that stretch. So yeah, I am, for like the 4th straight year, I think I'm going to be banging the drum for Josh Bell.
One thing that I think is worth watching with him is just the production versus lefties. He was really good against lefties. He was actually slightly better against left-handed pitchers than he was against righties, which I believe that's the first time in his career. He had a 740. He has a 742 OPS against lefties overall. He had more walks than strikeouts against lefties last season. So if that's a real improvement, that could be significant because it would make him an everyday player. But I do wonder whether it's a small sample size fluke. Anytime you're talking about versus left-handed pitcher, especially splits, you're talking about less than 200 plate appearances, I'm pretty sure. So that's the concern there for me. That's why I'm a little less likely to buy him, especially when he's more expensive than Joey Votto.
Yeah, Josh Bell kind of has this reverse Ozzie Albies thing going on where he's really great as a left-handed batter. For some reason, he still tries switch hitting, and
he's not terrible against lefties. Like 742 OPS. A lot of lefties have a worse split than that.
Yeah.
So if he could be a 770 OPS bat against lefties, that would probably be good enough.
Yeah, he was really bad against lefties in the first half last year. I remember that, and then he turned it on. So he got it going, and he earned more playing time as a result. But I love this group for all the reasons that you guys have mentioned. The Profit Pocket. That's Josh Bell, CJ Cron, Rhys Hoskins, and Joey Votto. Please feel free to help me out with the nickname there. Profit Pocket. That's not going to get it done. Let's wrap up here with ADP review, and we'll go through some other rounds that we haven't talked about yet. Let's just quickly recap. Again, first round, Vladimir Guerrero. Second round, Freddie Freeman. Third round, Matt Olson. At the 4-5 turn, you see Paul Goldschmidt. In the 5th round, we see Pete Alonso go. 6th round, Jose Abreu. Teardrop, 40 picks later. In the 10th round, Ryan Mountcastle, Max Muncy, Jared Walsh. For the most part, we are avoiding that group, though Max Muncy, he's a wild card. If he's healthy, I mean, there's huge room.
I'm not avoiding it.
All right,
I'll say that with Muncy.
Just a few picks later after that, the 10-11 turn, Jake Cronenworth and DJ LeMahieu. About 20 picks later after that, rounds 12 and 13, we see Josh Bell, CJ Cron, Rhys Hoskins, and Joey Votto go. 3 names going between ADP 150 and 185. That includes Ty France at 151.7, Anthony Rizzo at 177.3, and the aforementioned Alex Kirilloff at 183.7. Scott, is there anything that you'd like to add to Ty France and Anthony Rizzo since you already talked about Kirilloff?
I'm probably even lower than Anthony Rizzo than this. He seems like a guy who, whatever hope we had of him regaining the power, he used to be a consistent 30 homer guy with the Cubs. And I think the new ball effectively ended that because, even in those prime years, he wasn't a guy who hits the ball especially hard. And going to Yankee Stadium was supposed to fix him, and it didn't really. So I think we've seen the last of Anthony Rizzo as more than just a fringe guy. Ty France, I see him as kind of like a batting average specialist. He's kind of a more powerful version of Yuli Gurriel instead. So maybe like, Frank Schwindel. Maybe that's a better comparison for Frank Schwindel is Ty France. But he's useful and he's second base eligible as well.
4 more first basemen going between picks 200 and 220. That includes Yuli Gurriel at pick 204, Trey Mancini at 207.7, and Frank Schwindel at 219.3. I just said that there were 4 players here. Turns out that there are only 3 players here. Chris, Gurriel and Trey Mancini, we haven't talked about either of those yet. Gurriel, I know he's old too. He turns 38 in June. He hit 319 last year, 80 plus runs, 80 plus RBI, fantastic plate discipline in one of the best lineups in baseball. He averaged 3.1 fantasy points per game. Later on in your drafts, regardless of format, you need batting average in Roto or you need a utility bat in a points league. I like the value still on Yuli Gurriel. He's boring and he's fine.
204th overall. He's a really nice guy to have around. He's not going to win you a league, but that's a really, really solid bat to have at that price, and if he falls off, like if the 38-year-old just stops hitting at all, you spent a 200th overall pick on him. Like that's nothing. You lose nothing with that. So yeah, he's perfectly fine there.
I have him ahead of Mountcastle and Walsh in points leagues because, the strikeout rate is so low for Gurriel. It was one of his best years, but 307 points per game last year. Pete Alonso was 316. So he was definitely a top 12 starter in the points format last year.
On Trey Mancini, I wanted to quickly mention that he was really good for the first 4 months of the season. He hit 264 with an 812 OPS, and then he fell off over the final 2 months. And I think it's a pretty fair explanation. The guy was returning from cancer. Is there a possibility that he was fatigued as the season went on? Sure, I think that's very possible. I will also bring up he probably was someone that was helped out by the juice ball, in 2019 when he had his career year. So keep that in mind. I'm not sure we can get back there.
And he'll be hurt by the new dimensions. Like Mountcastle hit 2/3 of his home runs at home last year.
Sure. I would rather take a chance on him 100 picks later than Mountcastle, though.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure there's much of a difference between them as hitters.
This entire podcast is just anti-Ryan Mountcastle.
It makes me a little sad.
4 more first baseman going between picks 220 and 250. Jonathan Scope at 221.7. Bobby Dahlbeck, 224.3. Brendan Belt, 238.7. And Spencer Torkelson, one of the top prospects in all of baseball, has an ADP of 241.3. And last year hit 30 homers with a 935 OPS over 121 games in the minor leagues. Scott, I did want to ask you about Bobby Dahlbeck because I've seen some really smart people in the fantasy baseball industry hyping him up. And the StatCast numbers were really, really strong for Bobby Dahlbeck. And August and September was also like this ridiculous pace for him. 288 batting average, 18 homers. The plate discipline was much improved. The problem is the Red Sox have a prospect in Tristan Casas who's coming soon. Yeah. It's like, how long is Bobby Dahlbeck going to fight him off? I just don't know.
That's the thing. Yeah. Tristan Casas is, I don't have a lot of hope for Dahlbeck anyway. He strikes out 35% of the time. So that's, that's going to keep him from delivering on the power potential that we know he has. He's actually a better defender at third base than Rafael Devers. But, obviously Rafael Devers has already taken up third base. And if they bring Casas into play first base, where does that leave Dahlbeck? I'm not one of those who's hyping him. And frankly, if it's for a bench spot anyway, I might just take Casas in the hopes of him getting called up in June and being awesome.
If you are chasing power potential late in your drafts, though, I think it's worth a shot. 91st percentile in average exit velocity for Bobby Dahlbeck, a 20% barrel rate. That was 98th percentile. So there is a lot of power. There's also a lot of strikeouts for Bobby Dahlbeck. The remaining names we mentioned Nathaniel Lowe. We mentioned Luke Voit. Obviously, these guys are all in on Luke Voit. Miguel Sano going at pick 279. And then 300 plus, Jesus Aguilar, Lamont Wade Jr., Eric Hosmer, Rowdy Tellez, Yoshi Tsutsugo. Chris, is there anyone in this final group that you'd like to highlight very late, probably in deeper leagues?
Yeah, not so much. I know there are a lot of people who like Rowdy Tellez and they're, Yoshi Tsutsugo, what he did after getting he didn't get traded, he got cut, right?
Yeah, I think he just signed with the team.
Yeah, after ending, the Dodgers cut him earlier in the season, right?
Yeah.
I think there are reasons to be interested in those guys in your later rounds, and they're fine bench options. Jesus Aguilar is kind of a homeless man's Jose Abreu. Like, you're probably going to get decent power, decent run production numbers from him, and that's probably it. He probably won't hurt you anywhere else, and he will almost. I mean, he's what, the 28th first baseman going off the board or something like that. I think there's a very good chance Jesus Aguilar finishes higher than that. I don't think there's much of a chance that he finishes much higher than that.
How about the 28th first baseman plus 10, Chris? He's the 38th first baseman.
Sure. So, okay, he will finish much higher than 38th, but probably not much higher than 28th.
Yeah.
Like, he's probably like the 23rd best first baseman in the most likely outcome. And I get why other people are going ahead of him as a result of that, because there's just probably not that much upside there.
This is such a funny stat. He had 93 RBI last year. He had 49 runs scored. That is, I can't remember the time that I've seen
he led the NL in RBI for like a decent chunk of the season.
Yeah, he did. I wonder if at some point they want to give a longer look at Lewin Diaz and see what he can do. But
no,
well, if they have the DH spot,
they love Jesus Aguilar. Like, the Marlins may extend him before the season. They love Jesus Aguilar.
Scotty, anything that you'd like to add to any of these players we mentioned, and then I'll quickly bring up the prospects to know: Tristan Casas, Nick Prado, Vinny Pasquantino, Juan Yepez, and Seth Beer.
And you mentioned Torkelson already, who's deserves to go the earliest of them. Yeah. So Prado has pretty much mastered AAA already. I expect him to be up within the first couple months for the Royals. And Vinny Pasquantino, who's just a level behind him, but his skills might even translate cleaner since he doesn't strike out much. It's just a question of how they find at bats for the two of them. But I like them both as draft and stashes in deeper leagues. Seth Beer, he's coming back from shoulder surgery that could hamper him at the start of the year. But, the Diamondbacks are still all they have is Christian Walker at first base. And then they're probably going to have the DH spot available too. So I expect to see Beer as soon as he's healthy. And, he's one of those prospects who could go either way. I could see him becoming this must-start type player in fantasy, or I could see him just being this kind of platoon bat that never really breaks through as more. So definitely somebody to keep an eye on, and certainly invest in it like an NL-only league.
What is that, Chris?
Cue up the real big fish when he gets called up.
They've got a few interesting songs that I like. I'm not, obviously, Chris, you're the music guy on this podcast.
I mean, I'm surprised you know some real big fish songs.
Yeah, what is that? That's ska, right? That's the genre that is.
Ska.
Yeah, there's some sneaky good ska songs that I actually mess with. So we'll have a conversation for it another day. Yesterday I mentioned that, the catcher preview was running super long. Same thing with first base. I think that's probably just going to be the case here. There's just so many players to talk about. So it is what it is. For the next couple of weeks, you're going to get really long podcasts, and I hope you enjoy them. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. We'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.